As Bill Newell would say, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paul Leighton and Dustin Luca, the Salem News journalists who are happy to be. I'm happy to be with them as we do this at least twice a month here and talk to the reporters and see, kind of get the story behind the story and how things work out, what you guys have to do. And Paul, again, we'll start with Rank has his privileges here, I guess. Well, actually, even alphabetically, you're in front. So
There you go.
we want to start with the savings, the Silicon Valley Bank thing. That actually, you wrote that actually had some local reverberations.
Yes, there is or was, I guess we can say now, a Silicon Valley Bank branch in Beverly, which I have to be honest, I wasn't even aware of it. I actually did a story on this bank when it opened like 10 years ago. It was Boston Private Bank, located on Enon Street in North Beverly, like across from where Dawson's Hardware, now Aubuchon is, just to let people know. But anyway, they actually built a new bank, but a couple of years ago, it was bought out by Silicon Valley Bank. So when there was this national story about this bank failing and a run on the bank, so there was a local angle here in Beverly. And on Friday, when the news first came, there was actually a call to Beverly police from somebody saying that there are customers in the bank and the bank's trying to close on them. So police went up there. I talked to the chief about it, and they actually, everybody left, peacefully. But on Monday, when it reopened, I got there about 8:30 in the morning, and there were about a dozen people lined up looking to get their money out. You see, you saw this at these various branches. There's only, I think, the bank only had, 17 branches in California where it's based, and then like a handful in Massachusetts because they have bought out this Boston Private Bank. So anyway, and the people I talked to in line weren't, overly concerned because by Monday the government had reassured people that all their deposits would be covered, even those over $250,000, which is the normal threshold for the FDIC covering the deposits of failed banks. So everybody felt pretty good, but it was just interesting to be there. And when the bank branch, president opened the doors, and he had a couple of officials from the FDIC with him and said, yeah, we're going to take you one at a time. And, we only have a limited amount of cash on hand, so you can only get $1,000 in cash is the most you can get, but we can write you a check for the, full amount of your bank account. So it was just interesting to be on the scene of a bank run,
So there were no major problems with the depositors locally in Beverly?
No, it's, as far as I know, that everything went fine. Like I said, the big turn of events from Friday to Monday was that over the weekend, the government said that the FDIC would back up all the money. So everybody would get their money.
Okay.
The concern on Friday was if you had more than $250,000 in, that you could lose money. Of course, a lot of that was companies and investors and so forth. These were individual, customers. And one gentleman I talked to said he had 3 accounts, and none of them were nearly close to the $250,000 limit. So he knew he was going to get his money back. But like one woman I talked to said, they knew that they were going to get their money back, but it still created a lot of concern and worry,
Yeah, absolutely. And I always wonder about that electronically, because like what Venmo, you can throw stuff back and forth. And I'm thinking, what if somebody just lights a match? I mean, what happens? Out there and I also wonder how big cyberspace is. So, just random thoughts.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we want to turn over to Dustin now. And Dustin, recently there were I think they were called swatting events on North Shore schools, and that died down pretty quickly, thank goodness. I talked to a couple of police chiefs, and it's interesting that they're not wanting to talk about procedures, but they will talk in generalities about safety and how the kids go through these, lessons and scenarios and so on. But it did die down fast. But there was some bomb threats that you wrote about recently.
Yeah, so Salem made the list along with a whole bunch of other area schools when it came to those swatting events you were talking about. Salem High, I think Gloucester High got hit, and I mean it's the stories coming from teachers affected by this, students affected by this. I heard about one teacher who was like literally crying in the corner of their classroom, thinking that something was going on because their school was locking down and there was nothing there. So the following week after all of that, when a bomb threat came in to target the Satanic Temple on Bridge Street in Salem, it kind of caused a lot of alarms. And then all of a sudden we're like, wait a second, it's a school vacation week. So this actually doesn't affect the school around the corner. So Satanic Temple, about 280 feet away from the property line, is the Carleton Innovation School. There's like, I think 3 or 4 homes that are kind of in between them, but you're still talking about less than a football field distance between the property line for the temple and a school. The first bomb threat that came in was during vacation week, didn't affect anything. People were aggravated, road was shut down, and police say they're investigating it. And then the week after that, when schools returned, it happened again. This time around, it actually impacted the school. And what was really interesting to see, to kind of get to the story behind the story, um, Salem Public Schools seemed like they were ready for this. And I haven't had a chance to talk to them about this, so this is kind of maybe purely speculation on my part. But when the bomb threat came in, the school was ready and they had the students and the staff getting on a bus, basically taking a really fun field trip to the high school. I talked to the mayor literally as he was leaving the high school after seeing the kids set up in like the field house at the high school, saying they were all fine. They weren't worried. It was like getting a chance to see where the big kids play, basically. So here you have a bomb threat that comes in and for some reason gets emailed to us, gets emailed to Tufts University, gets emailed to the Salem, Oregon police, not the Salem, Massachusetts police. So it gets really weird. And then you think that it would have these massive consequences for the students. But very clearly, the schools had a football in play because the students were on a bus and moving as soon as that threat came in, basically.
Oh,
And
that's pretty cool.
the kids on the bus were apparently not stressed. I know that I had heard, about some students that were stressed when they were hearing about what was going on, but overall, it sounded like the schools were prepared, knowing school vacation week was in session for the first one. Let's be ready for a second one, and there was a second one, and they were ready.
The things you have to think of. When I was teaching back in the last century to the early part of this century, there were peaks and valleys of bomb threats that were called into schools, into the high school. I was at Gloucester High School, and we got so many of them. After a while, you become numb to them. And what we would do would be evacuate. They'd bring the dogs in and sniff around the school and stuff, and you just become inured to it. It's just and that's the danger, I think, especially with so much that's going on the one hand. But then on the other hand, I was talking to a police chief, and I remember telling my kids one time, kids will pull false alarms, to get people, to get everybody out of the building. There was a rash of that too. And I remember talking to the kids one time when this happened. I want to say it's back in the 80s or 90s. There was a false alarm in Boston at a school, and a firefighter actually got killed because he fell off the truck en route to the school. And just to let the kids know, it's not a lark. But this is something. Dustin, did you get a sense of urgency by officials or by school officials or anything, or just?
It was tough to determine. So I did very well sense of urgency from the schools. From the police, it's tough to gauge urgency because the police were not the first ones to get the call. And that's the weird thing about all this was Salem police were hearing about it after everybody else already got it. Because whoever is sending these threats and they're doing it using encrypted email, they kept sending it to the Salem, Oregon police, not the Salem, Massachusetts police. And the first of the two threats, it was actually Tufts University receiving the email and then notifying Salem police saying, hey, what the hell is this? So, and then we received it as well. It's weird, especially where the second one included Kate Fox from Destination Salem. I think it included the House of the Seven Gables, if I remember correctly. So it actually included a couple of Salem specific addresses, but still not the Salem police. So the Salem police were not the first to hear about it. So because of that, it's tough to officially gauge their handling of it. But I haven't heard any complaints. I've chatted with a couple people involved with the Satanic Temple, and they've only had great things to say.
And this is an open question to either one of you guys, I guess. Have you ever heard of anybody getting caught doing this?
It's tough. I mean, and I may not be the best person to ask that, neither Paul, because Julie's usually the person that picks it up after it hits a courtroom. So she's on top of it, and she would be able to speak better to, how often these incidents lead to charges and actual conviction.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I haven't. And Dustin raises a good point about the encrypted email, and like who knows where it's coming from. And I don't know if I bet they're working on that now, right, in terms of trying to track that down. But yeah, it seems like it would be really difficult.
You mentioned Julie Manganis, and I've got plenty of room on my computer screen here for another box. So not that I don't enjoy talking with you guys, because I do. It's a blast. I learned so much. All right, let's see. Paul, next up, Crane Beach. Little change at Crane.
Crane Beach, yes, we all love Crane Beach. And so the news here is that the trustees of the reservations, the nonprofit organization that actually runs Crane Beach, they're instituting a new policy. They're eliminating the beach stickers. So for years, if you were a member of the trustees, you would either get a parking sticker to Crane Beach as a part of your membership, or you could buy a sticker as part of your membership, depending on the level of membership. And I think that worked well for years. And then, if you didn't have a sticker, you could still go and pay at the gate. But things changed like most things, right, during the pandemic, where the beach, they instituted this system where you had to reserve a spot in advance because they had to limit the amount of people in the early days of the pandemic, even on the beach. I remember we went to Crane Beach in the early days of the pandemic, and you had to be like 15 feet apart, even at the beach,
Yeah.
You lay your blanket here. I mean, your towel there. And so they instituted this reservation system. So, and then they've kept the reservation system since. And so what the officials at the trustees told me, since the pandemic, their membership has almost doubled since the pandemic. And, people all of a sudden want to go to the beach, right? It's a place to go outdoors. And, Peter Pensiero, who runs Crane Beach for the trustees, said I'm just looking at my story here, that, permit holders for Crane went from basically from $10,000 to $20,000 to 20,000 people. So it doubled. And they have 1,200 parking spaces. So the problem was that people who had a sticker would call up or go online and reserve a spot. And then Peter said up to 30% of them wouldn't show up. So you have 30% of the parking spots on a beautiful Sunday summer day where people are dying to go to the beach, and 30% of the spots are empty because they've been reserved, but people don't show up. Does that make sense? So what they figured, if they eliminated the stickers, you have to reserve a spot, but now you have to pay when you reserve that spot. So people aren't going to, pay $20, to reserve a spot and then not show up. So that was basically the idea. Online on one of the trustees' Facebook pages, there was, people didn't like it, basically, which Pensiero acknowledged. And, I understand why they're doing it. It will cost people more depending on how many times they go. I think, if you go more than 5 times or so forth, depending on the level of membership, it's going to cost you more than what it used to cost you. But that's the reason. They're just trying to improve the access to the beach so that more people can get in.
That is interesting. Gloucester instituted a new parking system at their beaches last year, and I haven't heard any bad things about it.
Okay.
If I'm living in Lynn and I have to reserve a $35 parking space for next Saturday,
yeah,
I'm not going to be happy because you don't get that money back.
Yeah. When people say, well, you don't, you reserve a spot, but things change and, it rains or there's, a family situation comes up. But again, Peter at the trustee said they were having miles long backups, down our Gilla Road in Ipswich. And, so they needed to do something, I think, to try to improve the situation.
All right, I want to go over to Dustin now and talk about something I read about Salem State and diversity. I have an alarm going off in my head. I've seen many different articles in the Salem News about city or town diversity directors, I think, or whatever they're called. I think Caroline Enos wrote one about Danvers. And I can you follow up on that with me, Dustin? What have you found?
Yeah, so basically, there's a number of different things that are advancing as public conversations around diversity and inclusion and equity kind of evolve as we see more and more incidents, really of kind of terror targeting people of ethnicities and backgrounds. And this comes up a lot in our reporting because of incidents like in Marblehead, where you had one police officer carving a swastika into the hood of another one's. And public schools have been kind of grappling with how to cover the Holocaust, genocide studies like the Armenian genocide, for example, and all of these other things that have taken place in history that are really, really difficult to cover, especially with children. So Salem State University has the Humanities and Genocide Studies Department, and they've been doing very powerful work since their creation, but especially in the last few years where we've had this kind of heightened interest and concern over what's going on socially and conversations and everything like that. So Salem State, through grants and things like that, is now working with a number of public schools to kind of enhance their genocide studies in exactly how do you cover such dark subjects like the Holocaust and things like that, which provides, you know, the greatest example, but not the only example of these atrocities taking place in human history. So that's kind of the news that's going on there. Salem State announced that they basically, through grant work, are partnering with a number of new school districts. A couple of other schools have already been doing the work, and that's who we had talked to for that story. But this is just kind of, you know, one more step that's kind of moving the discussion forward to making sure that the stories that we should be teaching our kids about the behavior that we should not be modeling to adults are actually being taught in the public schools.
You cover school committee meetings in Salem, Dustin, and have you had any feeling or sense of the want to control the curriculum like we read about with Texas and Florida and
So
Kentucky?
I'm going to be honest, I don't have a very strong read about what's going on with Salem's handling of the studies. I really quickly, so what was interesting with the story that I wrote is that there was actually a Salem high school teacher that I talked to who's involved in the program as a fellow at Salem State. So his connection to Salem High is really only that he's a teacher at Salem High. When I reached out to Salem High School on this, they're like, oh yeah, we already have that programming. We're already doing that on their own. So I wasn't really able to kind of talk to them about that because Salem High was already kind of running its own game basically on all this. Whereas the story is kind of talking about the school districts that are now catching up because Salem State is now offering something. So Salem was actually kind of ahead of the game. And because of that, I'm actually not 100% sure of exactly what the conversation is locally.
Well, it's nice to have positive stories coming out of Salem after some of the negative stories we had with different levels of administration and so on over the years.
Oh, yeah.
It's good. I'm glad to hear that. And Paul, that leads me to you in terms of these new positions that are coming up in cities and towns dealing with diversity and inclusion.
Yes, and it came up here in Beverly last week or 2 weeks ago. The city, they hired a new diversity, equity, and inclusion director. Now, you know, this is a position that the city created, I think 2 years ago. A lot of cities and towns in Massachusetts, and I think across the country, are started creating these positions in the wake of the George Floyd murder, the Black Lives Matter movement. And Beverly actually, you know, they hired a guy a couple of years ago, and he was in the position for a year, and then he left for a job in the private sector. So it actually has taken a year to refill this position. And you know, I've talked to people, and they said that it can be difficult to find, you know, candidates to fill these spots. But Beverly, they hired this woman. Her name is Wangari Ferrari, and she's actually a singer. She has a music background. She's from Kenya originally. She's lived in Beverly for, I think, 7 years. She's been involved in the community through Main Streets and a couple of other organizations. So she's the one who's been hired. So their job basically is to look at how things work in the city and how, you know, to make sure that, you know, people of color and other minorities feel like they can have access to city services or anything else in the city and are being treated fairly. The city of Beverly, they hired a consultant a year ago to do an audit, an equity audit of the city's operations. And I spoke with my, you know, Mayor Mike Cahill last week, and the city's about to take some steps on that. So in other words, trying to hire more people of color. If you walk into, you know, Beverly City Hall, and I imagine a lot of other city halls on the North Shore, Beverly's an overwhelmingly white community. You see very few, people of color. And so they're going to make more, that's one of the jobs of the diversity director, is to, try to make an impact on the hiring process of the city and schools to get more people involved.
I think the issue of bias is something that we struggle with in school, both as students and as educators. And quite a few years ago, probably 20 years ago or more, someone complained about some math books that they were biased. And I'm a math teacher, and I thought, what? That can't be possible. So we went and looked at the math department, we looked at our books, and we looked at basically the word problems in every discipline were biased. And it would be example like this: well, Paul can mow the lawn in 2 hours. It takes Sally 3 days. That kind of thing. And it was very subtle, but it was there. And
Wow.
At first, my knee-jerk reaction was, "What are you, crazy?" But then when I looked at it, okay, if you consider that little girl reading about this, that gets old after a while. So this is something I think that's becoming more and more ingrained, not only in schools, but I think also in culture of the cities and towns. And does the diversity director have any real clout? I mean, or is it that she makes suggestions?
Well, that's a really good question, Rick, because I know there was an issue last year that became before the city council, and it was actually this idea of, there was a movement to make a land acknowledgement statement at the start of every council meeting. In other words, acknowledging this land was originally the home of indigenous people. And the diversity director at the time, Abu Tarpan, was in favor of this and came before the city council and wanted to see this happen, and the council ended up voting against it. And one of the other councilors said, well, this is why we hired a diversity director, to suggest these types of steps, and now we're going against it. So right then, I mean, that's an instance where the diversity director didn't have the authority. But I think that there is an effort. The diversity director reports directly to the mayor, and her offices in City Hall are right next to the mayor. And I know Mayor Cahill has said it's a priority of his. And so I think that this office and this director will have some influence, but it's something to keep an eye on going forward.
I know when Mayor Driscoll was at the helm, there was a lot of push for diversity in government and in the city. And you talk about way ahead of the curve. I think she was way out there. You're shaking your head, Dustin. Is that right?
Oh, what's interesting about that is, there's a lot of things that the city of Salem has done that kind of beat the punch on the city of Beverly, but Beverly actually hired its DEI director before Salem did. Like, I remember, the first talk about actually hiring one took place in Beverly before it took place in Salem. So Beverly gets the credit on this one. But, Salem also had the Race Equity Task Force that came together that is now a commission. And they had weekly marches during the pandemic that were going through the streets of Salem about this kind of stuff. One other topic one stat that gets thrown around in Salem a lot when you're talking about equity is the fact that the high school, I believe, now is majority Hispanic versus white, but the staff body is still like 85% white. So there's a disconnection right there, and that disconnection where you have an overwhelmingly more white population on the staff than the students speaks to one of the biggest issues, because how does that staff then educate those students? And that's where you start getting ingrained biases, microaggressions, like the word problem that you would not question until somebody questions it for you, because you're like, oh, wait a second, that is a little bit of a microaggression.
Yeah, it was, and I don't know. I think it's called passive bias. Something I have a bias and I don't even know it until someone points it out. And I hope more people are able to do that. We want to wrap it up here. Dustin, what else would you like to mention before we go?
So Willows is going to be really big in Salem for the next couple of months. Basically, there's a story that I'm working on and wrapping it up right now, actually, where we have the second phase of construction for the Willows Park. Last year, they gave it a new hill design, new parking areas, new tennis ball and pickleball courts that are kind of multi-purpose. And they're wrapping that up this year. They still have kind of the temporary parking area they set up last year, absolutely destroyed a field. So they're restoring that field. But what's coming next for the Willows if you know the Willows Park, where you've got the row of restaurants, which is actually not Restaurant Row, that's a different thing, but you've got like the Salem Low, which is going to be coming back. You've got Hobbs Popcorn, you've got the arcades. If you go right beyond that, there's basically an asphalt sea where it's all pavement leading to where the pier used to be. So they're going to be tackling that. They're designing it right now. They're going to be starting construction in the fall, wrapping it up for Memorial Day next year. But there's going to be new paths, benches going to be set up in different places, new lighting is going to be coming a little further down the road. And then right after that, they're going to be, this portion of the park is going to be connecting to the new pier, which is going to start construction right after that. So there's going to be a lot of activity out there during the summer with engineers kind of poking rods into the ground and say, oh yeah, there is dirt down there, amazing, and kind of doing their thing, playing in the sand, and then poof, you're going to have new setup for park. So
Is it going to be open this spring and summer for?
so the park is going to be open, but the actual construction itself is not going to start until the fall.
Okay.
And some of that gets to when the grant money is going to become available. Some of it gets to they have to get the permits and they have to do the stuff next to the water and everything like that. So there's all these other steps and hurdles that they have to jump over that the public really doesn't get to see that much because they're kind of boring. But the actual construction is going to start probably sometime this fall. But what's going to be happening in the next couple of months is you're going to actually see more upgraded design. You're going to see people out there doing work kind of to test soils and things like that. So there's going to be a lot of activity in the Willows this year as the activity in the Willows peaks up like it does every season.
Great stuff. Salem News reporter Dustin, Luca, and Paul, any final thoughts?
Let me see, Rick. I did a story, I think that ran today on the choral director at Beverly High School, Carolyn Polanin, who's retiring. This weekend will be the 31st spring musical that she's directed. They're doing Funny Girl. If you want to go, Beverly High School, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I've gone to a couple of those over the years. One of my daughters was involved, and they're really great events. As sure they are in a lot of communities. They really do a nice job. They have volunteers who help with the sets and the costumes. These are volunteers, parents whose kids were in the school 20 years ago still come back to help with the sets and the costumes. So it's really a nice community event, and felt it was good to recognize Lynn Polanin after all those years of work.